Il Principe is not a new game. Matter of fact, it's about 20 years old, and yet I decided to play it only now. And now, of course, many times when I try a new game, then I feel like sharing my opinions with you. Maybe you'll be curious about this game also. Reason, next year, next May, I'm gonna be teaching a class in Florence, and it'll be about the Renaissance. So I decided to start playing some games about the Italian Renaissance. Maybe I'll bring some to play with the students, just as a little bit of a break when we're not doing other very important stuff like visiting museums or drinking cappuccino. So, Il Principe. From the title, you know it is inspired by Machiavelli's classic book about political science, and basically one of the foundational texts about political science, being a book in which he has decided to tell you how things work rather than how they should, or people would like them to work in an ideal world. In this game, we're going to play the role of famous families of the time, like the Medici, and each family will have a card, which is also a player aid, and tokens that will be used, like the Visconti here, and tokens that will be used and placed on the map of Italy, and they will give you points at the end of the game if you have majority of influence in the regions here. Between the regions, you have various kind of cities, and some cities border only one region, like Siena only borders this area here, or Orvieto. Other regions, multiple ones, like Firenze, is connected to 3 regions. When you develop a city, and we'll see what that means, you will get to place your influence in any and all regions adjacent to it. For example, that would be what I can do. If I develop Florence or Firenze, like we say in the old country, then I can place 2 influence tokens, and they could go there or they could go there. That sort of thing. Again, at the end of the game, there will be a scoring phase where we look for majority. Developing cities, I said, that's one of the things that we do in the game, one of the main things indeed. The other is to acquire these roles here, professional roles, for which there are 2 varieties, the major and the minor variety. The heart of the game is, during the game, we will collect money and we will spend it in auctions to acquire these cards that represent different types of buildings, castles, religious buildings, for example, universities, markets. And these cards will be played to do mainly 2 things. One is to acquire these rolls that will give us points and will also give us a special ability. And the other one is to develop cities. There will be 4 cities available for development. They come out of this deck here. And each city tells you how much money you need to discard to build that city, and how many and what kind of buildings need to be discarded. So to develop Padova, I need 2 green, 1 blue, 1 white, and 4 coins. And again, so that's again one of the uses for these cards. If I meet all of those requirements, I can select Padova from the pool of cards available. I discard the corresponding resources. I score that many victory points right away, marking them on the victory track, and I get to place that many influences in regions adjacent to the city I developed. As for that concept there. So, a turn starts with each player drawing 4 cards. You may still have cards in your hand from a previous turn, suppose that was my hand, and so I just add the new ones to the ones that I had. Then I take any 2 from my hand, doesn't have to be from the ones I just drew, it could be from previous turns, any 2, and I put them down. I discard them in a common pool because everybody will do the same. Every player will put down 2 cards from their hand. And then we auction them, We look at what people have put in the common pool. We divide the cards by type, like so. And we auction them by group. by group, starting from the smallest group and going up. So we start with a group that has one card, then the other group with one card, and then we go on until the largest group. And that's it. We auction. It's starting with the player with the Principe marker. The player can bid any amount of coins as long as they have them in their personal bank, or pass. We go around until, well, maybe everybody passed, in which case no one wanted the card is discarded. Or somebody wins the bid, they pay the corresponding amount to the bank, and they take the card or cards. They also take the Principe token because they'll go first in the next bid. Now, during the bidding phase, when you collect, when you win a bid and you collect cards, you also have the option of immediately building a city right away. And that can be very useful because, remember, the cities for development or building, they're available there, they're available to everybody. And so sometimes you're afraid, if I wait until later, somebody else may develop the card that I want. So, winning a bid also have that advantage there. So we continue until all these cards have been assigned to players and or discarded. Then players will look at their hand, and then we start another phase in the turn. In this other phase, the players going around taking turns can either build a city, if you waited for that long and you still have your resources, or play cards from hand into a personal tableau. And suppose that I decided to do that, and that's my personal tableau right now. After that phase, we'll look at the professions that are available here. Actually, if people have profession tiles in their personal area from previous turns, when it's time to check who controls the professions, we put them all back there. And then we simply look and see who has the majority. Whereas the majority, suppose for this profession here, for the bankers, I have majority. Makes sense. I am a Medici. They were bankers. And so I take the major role, the major tile, and also gain an advantage. I immediately gain 2 money. And maybe another person has as a second majority, and then they get the minor role, which again also gives them an advantage. You see these victory points here. You score them when someone else's develop a city that has those tokens, that kind of buildings. For example, if I have these 2 rows here and somebody develops Firenze, since Firenze has green and yellow, I score 4 points. If somebody develops Firenze, same thing, and I have these tokens, then I score 3 points. That if somebody else does it. And so I guess the idea is that one of you is developing political power, which will have influence, also gives you points and has influence in the surrounding regions, and somebody else is looking more into economic, social influence, power at various levels, in religion, in the law, in the military, and things like that. So, you will have your tableau of cards. Important thing, when you get a major role, not a minor, you take half of the cards that gave you that role, rounded up, and you turn them face down. And that does not happen if you acquire a minor role. If I take that card, the green, because I am the second there, then I simply retain that. So there's a little bit of a rubber banding element there, that getting a major role is pretty good, but also it weakens your tableau. But then there is an ability here allowing you to flip face up a non-green card, so sometimes you bring them back that way. So you have a pretty dynamic tableau here, allowing you to claim different cards and different abilities. So, this is the general idea. Let me check. The turn again has a number of steps. Let me sure you didn't forget anything. No, that's good. You draw 4 building cards and discard 2 into the common supply. Then you do the bid and auctions, and that allows you to build a city. In the next phase, you can build a city or play building of one color into your tableau. And then return back rolls and acquire new rolls. And you continue like this until the end of the game. At that point, you have a fairly lengthy scoring phase, the final scoring to add to the remaining scores. If you want to add the details, you simply pause and read. But that's a bit of a point salad, which is good because it obfuscates who is ahead until you go through all the steps. Having power, having roles, having money, having influence is all good. And again, a big source of points will be having control of the various regions through influence tokens. The player with the highest score wins the game and becomes the new Principe, I guess. The box is too big. I thought you need to know a box this big. Actually, that's where you can store all of the components with the exception of the board. The board could be cut into and made it into two smaller boards, or remove this part entirely. You don't really need this as to set them up. It's not so many cards or tiles that you need them set up. I guess in the early 2000s, the people were still buying a lot of games in brick and mortar stores, not so many online, and so games are still competing for shelf space and attention in stores. Maybe that's why, or maybe, I don't know. Box too big. I don't think that's going to be a big of a problem. Now, the game. When we look at games from the late 90s, early 2000s, and they're good games, very often you have this paradox that are some of the best games that were available back then, but then as the hobby continues to evolve, they may look a little bit dated. Catan is that way, for example. That was my favorite game in the early 2000s, and I don't play it anymore because of the standards that it set and because the hobby has moved forward. Thanks to it, but also past it. So Il Principe, my first worry was like, maybe it's gonna feel one of those fiddly, outdated early Euro games. Now, it is a bit dated, but not too much. It is a bit fiddly, but not too much. In general, I think it holds up pretty well by the standards of Eurogaming that games of that age, including this one, had contributed to create. The dated element is in the fact that the turn structure doesn't feel particularly streamlined at all. It feels like you're doing very different things, and they almost don't feel like they lead up to one another all that much. You still have to look at the player aid and say, hey, which is the next phase? And sometimes we skip a phase and wait, we need to go back because everybody builds a city. Everybody builds a city during the bid phase, and then we forgot about the playing. We go directly to the assigning the roles. Like, wait a second, no, we need to, the phase where we need to play cards to influence what the roles are. So you do things that feel a little bit disconnected, but somehow they go together well at a much higher level, in which is fun. It's fun to do all of these things because you have a fairly tight engine, but not a punishingly so engine of resources, because there's the auction element. I love auction games. I'm just not very good at them, and yet it is one of my favorite mechanics. It may be my favorite mechanic in which I'm really not good at it, and yet I like it. And so there is an element of the economy has the human element there, because maybe the person playing next will do something really irrational, and because they're allowed to overbid and spend a lot, or they do not spend on something that would work. So there are games in which the economy is more objectively hardwired into the game. Here people can spend more or less. And so you may take advantage of that. There's an element of persuasion. There's an element of diplomacy. Hey, I really need this. Please don't start a bidding war because it's not going to give an advantage to anybody. Hey, why don't you wait until the next bid? I think it's better for you. There's an element of negotiation and diplomacy there surrounding the auction. So the auction is fun, as auctions usually are in games, and I'm bad at those, as that usually is the case indeed. And then building the sets, creating the sets to develop the cities. And again, very interesting idea that you can wait a little longer. Maybe I have enough cards now in my hand to win a lower bid and develop a small city. Or I can wait until I acquire a bigger pool of cards. Now I can build a bigger city if I get to do that at all, because somebody may develop it before me. It's a simple trade-off there, but it creates tension, it creates a nice, interesting strategy. The longer you wait to build a bigger city, the more chances there are that somebody else will build it instead. And finding that balance also with the professions is very nice, because I'm building a huge city, or I'm spending a lot to build a city, and somebody else is scoring almost as many points from the professions in my city as I am as a developer. And I may feel bad about it, but then I'm also creating the influence, and so I'm playing basically another parallel area majority game on the board. So you got the auction, the area majority, the set collection, the tableau. All of these things that give you a sense again of a philosophy of game design, less streamlined of what we have very often nowadays. Again, it feels like a mosaic of different mini games, and yet, and this is the important thing, usually when I talk about all of these little mechanics being together but not necessarily going together, that's usually a negative, and yet I played the game and I enjoyed it. I find that somehow it works. That's why you feel a little bit of that cumbersome term structure with all those steps that you had to go through. They don't, to me, logically lead one to the next. But it works. But it works. I don't know how, but we all had a good time, a really good time. And we were like, wow, that's never heard of this game, but let's play it again. And this game, I think, will get played because now the point is that it's not so easy to teach, because there isn't a single, everything that you teach, you have to leave something out. To understand how the professions work, you need to explain the development of the cities, because that's when people with the professions score points. But to do that, you need to explain something else. So it's not so easy to teach, but it's not particularly complicated either. So I think this game will surprisingly see more time on the table than I expected. I thought maybe I'll just try it as an historical curiosity, but this has been met with more approval from myself and my group than I expected. So Il Principe, it's a bit old, in some aspects may look a little bit dated, but I think it's still pretty good.